Hey everybody, how are you? Welcome to a very special edition of Narrative Live on what has been a long, arduous, sometimes painful day. How are you, Tracy?
I'm doing okay. It's been a long day, Zev, and a lot of people, the reactions on social media, it's a difficult one for a lot of people today, and so that's why we wanted to take some time and really
Sorry.
go through what this summary statement was about.
All right, I'm sorry about that. Okay, I'll switch that off. I was going to tell everyone there I'm on Periscope, as you are, getting everyone's
Yes.
messages, but I didn't mute it there, so that's why you heard us coming back to us, which you warned me about, Tracy. Thank you for warning me about that.
I did,
and there it happened. So,
and if you guys see me looking down, it's because I'm trying to monitor comments on Periscope on my phone at the same time we're talking. So, like Zev said, I'm the queen of multitasking. So we'll see how well that goes tonight.
And we really are appealing to you and opening ourselves to you tonight. If you have any comments, please join us on Periscope. We'd love to hear from you what you think. This has been a process that we've all been through collectively. And maybe we don't like what we saw today. Maybe we still think there's hope. Maybe we think this is the end of the world. We're here to hear your points of view and share them with us as you can on Periscope. So today, what we're going to do is go through this letter, this 4-page. Can you believe 2.5 years or more has come down to 4 pages with maybe 3 lines excerpted from the actual report? It's not that much.
That speaks volumes in and of itself, Seb.
It does. That we have not yet seen a pretty thorough version or anything thorough really from Robert Mueller. All we've seen right now is 4 pages that have been put together by William Barr, who's a new AG appointed by Trump recently, who's a Trump fan, who campaigned for this job, and now he's the guy who's going to be in the hot seat because he's made some pretty controversial decisions in his 4-page letter. And we're going to go through that today. We're going to look at some of the things that we think would certainly raise questions for us about the decision. And there's some really big issues that America has to face, Congress has to face, and it's not the kind of stuff that we can run away from, because if we don't deal with this now, we're never really going to be able to deal with it. And that's the reality of the situation we're in. Tracy.
Yeah, and Zev, I think it's really important for us to be on tonight because we do feel like we've all been part of a community together over the past 2 years. And, we feel frustration just like everybody else. But there's also a lot of signs of hope. And there's a lot of things that we still need to look for going forward. And I really want to talk about those tonight.
I agree with you. I think that there's so much still to happen prosecution-wise. I mean, we're still going to see a lot happening in the courts. So that's not that's not gone. And there's also, of course, what's going to happen in Congress. These are challenging times for the Democratic Party in Congress, but it's also a huge opportunity for them. I think the next few days we're going to rehear the conversation about impeachment, relitigate whether it is the right thing to even bring into Congress just because you have to, just because the Constitution says you have to. But all of that in just a minute. I wanted to start off with Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, because he had a press conference in New York. It was hastily arranged, but it sort of gives you an understanding of some of the holes, and it also answers some of the big responses that Donald Trump had, which is basically that he's been exonerated, that he's been vindicated. This is what Chairman Nadler says from the Judiciary Committee.
First, President Trump is wrong. This report does not amount to a so-called total exoneration. Special Counsel Mueller was clear that his report, quote, does not exonerate, close quote, the president. The special counsel spent 22 months uncovering evidence of obstruction and other misconduct. Attorney General Barr, who auditioned for his role with an open memorandum suggesting that the obstruction investigation was unconscionable and that it was almost impossible for any president to commit obstruction of justice since he is the head of the executive branch, made a decision about that evidence in under 48 hours. His conclusions raise more questions than the answer, given the fact that Mueller uncovered evidence that, in his own words, does not exonerate the president. It is unconscionable that President Trump would try to spin the special counsel's findings as if his conduct was remotely acceptable.
I think he said acceptable at the end there. It is interesting that William Barr just looked at the evidence for 48 hours. I mean, we've looked at the evidence for 2 years. We might have reached similar conclusions, but, or maybe not, we'll tell you later on in the show. But the reality of it is he only had it for 48 hours, not very long for him to go through this and reach a conclusion on something so significant to the future of the United States.
Yeah, and when it comes down to it, Zev, the obstruction of justice, I believe Mueller was leaving that up to Congress to decide, not Barr. So that's something we need to question as well.
The biggest question of the whole thing is going to be the obstruction of justice, but we'll get to that later. Let's begin our look at the Mueller report. This is what it looked like today. This is all we got. 4 pages summarizing a much lengthier report, but we don't even know how long the much lengthier report was. And basically, this letter goes through 2 areas of investigation. The conspiracy, did the Trump campaign collude, conspire, whatever you want to call it, with the Russian government in order to make an impact on the elections? And secondly, was there an attempt to cover up the obstruction of justice? So those are the 2 big question marks. And let's go through these page by page because there's a lot to talk about. I think maybe we begin with the first page, which is where conspiracy happens, right? So talk a little bit to us, if you can, Tracy, about why this definition of conspiracy is so different than people might have expected. And I know we've got the slides coming later, but it is important maybe to set this up for people before.
Yeah, and we talked about this earlier tonight, Zev, when we were preparing for the show. One thing I was not aware of, and we actually will have it as a slide, and we pulled it up, was that specifically Mueller was looking for coordination between the Russian government,
correct,
and anyone in Trump's campaign. So I think a lot of people saw that as, well, okay, maybe people associated with the Russian government, or maybe oligarchs, or people who are cutouts for Putin or the GRU. We may have made those assumptions when in reality what Special Counsel Mueller was looking for was specifically coordination with the Russian government.
Yeah, I pulled up the letter here. This is the original assignment from Rosenstein, I think is how you say it, to Mueller. And it's very specifically, it talks about the Russian government. I think a lot of us were really, really excited about this idea that there are any other investigations that may arise from the original investigation. That sort of gave us some hope that there was more coming. But all those investigations were farmed out. And so we're this very narrow purview of what Mueller was looking at is really what we're left with. And it's super significant when you really consider what we got today, when you consider the assignment was just to look at the coordination between Trump campaign and the Russian government. They got it. They basically they absolutely did their job. But that was a very narrow purview. So it's hard to
it was. So if you think about this, and did Putin and Trump sit together before the election and make out a little outline and a plan of, this is how we're going to interfere and this is what you're going to get from us? I mean, I think that's a little crazy and naive to think that would have actually happened. But that's
Vladimir, hey Donald, I'll steal the elections for you. What do I get? It didn't happen.
You dropped those sanctions, buddy. You're going to do it.
And hey Vlad, can I get the tower as well? What do you think about the tower? I mean, this is not how this kind of stuff we get done. So the expectation that we're going to find evidence of an actual conspiracy conversation between the 2 guys, not likely. So let's go through this. Let's begin with the finding around the conspiracy. So these are actual words from Mueller, not from Barr. These are from the actual report. Tracy, you still there?
I am.
I can hear you. Okay, so this basically said the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government on election interference. That's the conclusion, and it's very narrow and probably accurate. I don't know if there is any evidence to give us specific Russian government coordination. That's a lot, but there is a lot that we don't think was actually included, and we'll go through some of that right now. The key lines in this particular letter, for me at least, in this section around the conspiracy, is firstly this definition of what Mueller was looking for. So in the footnote, for some reason it's in the footnote, but it's super significant. The special counsel defined coordination as an agreement, tacit or express, between Trump campaign and the Russian government on election interference. So they would need
and that goes back to exactly what we were just saying, in an agreement, Putin and Trump sitting down and saying, this is how we're going to do it. This is what we want the outcome to be. And this is what we'll get in return.
Right. None of that was likely to happen. And certainly this idea of an agreement of some sort is unlikely to happen. And that the agreement would have been about election interference is also very specific. Because there might have been a nudge, wink, wink, but we're asking. That's a very high bar that he was looking for, and no wonder he couldn't reach that. Now, the second line that I think is really interesting is the special counsel did not find any U.S. person or Trump campaign officials conspired or knowingly coordinated with the IRA in its efforts. I don't know. I mean, you got to look at the Cambridge Analytica operation, the digital operation at Alamo. I find it really hard to believe that 30 million user profiles were harvested from Facebook by a Russian guy in Cambridge, who then goes and lectures in St. Petersburg, right next to the Spy Academy in St. Petersburg. We think that the Cambridge Analytica data landed up there, and then that same company, Cambridge Analytica, had people inside the digital operation at the Trump headquarters.
Right.
How could there not have been something there?
Again, Zev, I want to point out that this is all very carefully worded. So if we go back and look at that, we're specifically talking about the Internet Research Agency itself.
Right.
Okay.
Right, but yes,
all of those other things that are tangent to the IRA aren't specifically addressed here. And I think that's carefully worded.
You are so smart, and that is exactly correct. Because I think one of the things that we have to realize is that no one goes into one of these things like thinking that they're doing it under the idea that they're going to be covering up something. They're not doing it with the notion that they're they're going to do a straight up job. So there's always cutouts. There's always third parties. There's different people that are ultimately intermediaries in these things. And that's why it's so hard to prove a case like this, especially when you're dealing with state government. It's really impossible to get to. Third line that we really think is
what's that third line on there? Because I think that one is super important.
So, it goes on to, it says the special counsel brought criminal charges against a number of Russian military officers for conspiring to hack the computers in the United States for purpose of influencing the elections. So, but as noted above, the special counsel did not find that the Trump campaign or anyone associated with it conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in these efforts, despite multiple offers from Russia-affiliated individuals to assist the Trump campaign.
Super important. This is, for me, this is a boom. Why? Because it is not, the special counsel is not saying the Trump campaign didn't coordinate with WikiLeaks. They are saying that they did not coordinate with the Russian government in this hacking attempt.
That's
right?
Correct. Yep.
And if we think about this, the D.C. court system is who has Roger Stone's case, right? It's not even special counsel Mueller. It was sent to the D.C. court system.
That's correct.
So there will be, in my opinion, there has to be more that's going to come out of that trial in regards to WikiLeaks and if there was any coordination with the Trump campaign.
We're going to go into that trial in a second. You're so right to raise it. But I actually want to also mention one other thing. I noticed as we were talking here, let me pull this up full screen again so we can take a good look at this. I think that maybe there's been some additional language added into the Barr version here. Because, in Barr's version, he keeps adding this little subquote or subclause or anyone associated with it. You see that on the third box in the blue box? The second line, third line from the bottom, it says, or anyone associated with it. But when I look at the quote provided from Mueller's report, I don't see the anyone associated with it. That's not what was quoted from Mueller. So maybe there's something there worth looking at least, as to what exactly did Mueller conclude, because Barr's conclusion seems different, seems to add these other people, seems to add these associates. And I'm wondering why there's associates, because the case that we know that is under investigation with the associates is the Roger Stone case that's taking place in DC. And so maybe Barr is trying to sort of maybe eliminate the whole problem by including these associates, where maybe Mueller was trying to make them separate. And we won't know until we get the final report from Mueller, which is why it's so important right now. We're looking at someone's analysis, and that's never going to be enough for us.
Right. And, Zev, we also won't know until we see many of these other indictments and in other jurisdictions how they are going to play out as well.
Correct. You're absolutely correct. We're going to go through those jurisdictions and those court cases in a bit. But the one thing we found the other day, which was really interesting, is that this is from the Stone docket that's filed at the U.S. District Court in D.C. And it's got this little number here. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's a little small for my eyes, but it does have a related case number. And Tracy tracked this down. The related case is the GRU case. So here's Roger Stone under investigation, being charged with something that is related to the Russian hack of the DNC and the publication of the DNC emails.
Yes. So you don't know if it's is it related because of WikiLeaks, or is it related because of Guccifer, who he communicated with? We don't know.
We don't know. And I mean, that's one of the reasons this is a game of subterfuge. We don't know what the relationship between the GRU and the IRA was. My understanding has always been that those two are sort of hand in glove, the same thing. The GRU hacks, the IRA infiltrates social media and sends messages. That's part of the same operation, but proving that is very difficult. And if in fact you can prove that Stone did know about the GRU, then you could also suggest that if the GRU worked with the IRA, that he worked with the IRA, but he would never know.
Right. And one could argue, which I think I did earlier today, that I'm not sure Roger Stone is smart enough to figure out that Guccifer was GRU. But that's a whole other subject.
I'm willing to go there with you on that. I gotta say, what a character! What a character! And this case begins in November, so mark your calendars. It's probably going to be a long, arduous case if it ever gets heard.
We also have to remember too, how many thousands upon thousands of documents. How long did it take them? They say it was going to take them to go through all of the documents for the trial, like 9 months or something. Yeah,
I mean, they asked for a 9 month delay.
Crazy amount of evidence.
You're right. There's a 9 month delay, and that's because there was terabytes, I think, of data that they were still looking through. It. I don't know how they could reach the conclusions that they have yet if they haven't looked through all that data. Right. Because then it really does say this is an incomplete report, because there's still so much to come from the Stone. From the Stone indictment.
Was handed off.
It is. It's still continuing, and there will possibly be other indictments, and there will. But your point is, it could just be that it stops at WikiLeaks, that it doesn't continue on because Stone would never have known that, which is possible. That he would never have known that it was a GRU.
It's my thought. I don't know. It's a thought.
You have good thoughts. So a couple of things to note here, because it's interesting. So these are three different clips from three different indictments. You can guess which ones. Do you want to guess which ones? So the one on the top.
I'm guessing that first one is Stone.
This is Stone. So it says by July 2016, Stone informed senior Trump campaign officials that he had contacted basically WikiLeaks, which is organization one, but documents. And that he had documents released would be damaging to the Clinton campaign, and he also said that there was more to come. Interesting, and the guy was living in the Ecuadorian embassy, which is why we know it's Julian Assange. Below that is an excerpt from the testimony from Michael Cohen before the House Oversight Committee, and in that
this was a bombshell. This was a real bombshell.
And this again suggests that maybe Donald Trump did know that there was a collusion conspiracy, but there's not enough evidence to convict him or to indict him. And so here he talks about what could be the same call. It says, in July 2016, days before the Democratic Convention, I was in Mr. Trump's office with his secretary, announced that Roger Stone was on the phone, and then goes on to say that Assange, and then Mr. Assange told Mr. Stone that within a couple of days, there would be a massive dump of emails that would damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Probably the same call. We have a witness to it now with Michael Cohen. And Donald Trump's in the room learning about Julian Assange and WikiLeaks, not about the GRU, to your point. And then on the right there.
And I just want to get, if anybody takes something away from this, I hope they'll take this little piece of hope right here, is that this does not mean there was not coordination with WikiLeaks. This summary does not address WikiLeaks. It addresses the Russian, specifically. It addresses the Russian government. So it's yet to be known whether anyone in the campaign, other than Roger Stone, was working and coordinating with WikiLeaks on the dump of the emails.
Yes, and the same thing applies, I guess, to Cambridge Analytica and those other sort of third-party cutouts, which we don't know quite their involvement, and they could still be in some ways implicated. So these are really important points.
Yes.
The last one here, and I won't spend a lot.
Can I just I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I remember Professor Carroll had a tweet the other day after he had he's suing Cambridge Analytica in London. And I recall him saying there were some things that they would not turn over to him or he doesn't know about because Cambridge Analytica is currently under investigation. So that's something else people need to remember, is that this is outside of what the special counsel was doing. And yes, Cambridge Analytica is under investigation.
It is indeed. Just because it's up here, I should explain what this thing on the right here. This is from the GRU indictment. And this talks about how basically Jucifer, I'm not sure how you would say it, 2.0, was a GRU employee. He was pretending to be just an ordinary hacker in the universe, if there's such a thing, and that he contacted Stone. So now we've got documentation and evidence from three sides, from Michael Cohen, from Stone's evidence, and from the evidence they got from the GRU, all suggesting to me that there seems to be like a little conspiracy going on.
There's some coordination of something going on there, Zeb. I don't know, but
even if you can't prove it, it still looks like something nefarious might have been happening, and maybe that's a big takeaway from today's 4-page letter from Mr. Barr. The next thing, of course, is obstruction. I think we should deal with that in just a second, but maybe seeing how we're talking a lot. No, let's talk about obstruction. Let's go into obstruction. I was going to try to play a piece of tape out of order here, and then that wouldn't have been wise. So
no, let's go with obstruction. That's on everybody's mind.
Exactly. So take us through this.
Okay, so the special counsel states that while this report does not conclude that the president committed a crime, it also does not exonerate him. And so that's where my understanding is that AG Barr took it upon himself, I guess. Is this correct, Zev? To exonerate Trump instead of letting Congress investigate? Am I understanding correctly?
I mean, that's certainly my understanding, and it's shocking. I mean, not only do we not know if Mueller wanted to decide or had decided what his decision was going to be, because we just don't have that record, and maybe we'll get it, maybe we won't. But more shockingly than that, the Attorney General, with 48 hours of looking at this evidence, which is really not a long time. We've been spending 2 years looking at it, and it's hard to reach some conclusions. He's been able to do it in 48 hours, has been able to say, oh, the president didn't do it. Some of his underlying reasons are so wrong, it's just upsetting, but he also, the language he uses usurps the power of Congress. It's up to Congress to decide whether there's an impeachment here based on these charges. It's not up to the Attorney General, William Barr, who's a Trump appointee, to determine if his boss was the carried out obstruction of justice or obstructed justice in any way. And this is going to be a huge sticking point.
I have something I want to add.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let me put you back up.
I thought of this afternoon, and he said that he made this, he concluded this while he was discussing it with Rod Rosenstein, right?
Really good point.
So the problem that I have with this is that Rod Rosenstein wrote a memo that Trump used as part of his reason to fire Comey, which is what was being considered as obstruction of justice. So why was Rod involved in that conversation at all?
It's a stunning set of circumstances when you think about it. Rosenstein is just there to oversee the investigation, but because he's actually a witness to a portion of the investigation, he's a witness to obstruction of justice because he's one of the reasons Comey got fired. How is it possible that he can conclude anything? You see it there in that second box. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein and I have concluded that evidence developed during the special counsel's investigation is not sufficient to establish the president committed an obstruction of justice offense.
Wouldn't it behoove him to make sure that there was no obstruction of justice in this case, considering he was a witness to it?
He was a witness, and we don't know to what extent he was, what was going on in that situation because we just don't have the underlying evidence. But it's certainly the appearance of a conflict of interest is there. Setting aside that, why is the Attorney General making a decision that is why we had a special counsel? Special counsel's lone job was to figure this out, and yet we're allowing the AG who just walked into the job, whose entire testimony when he was hired is all about how he was going to basically approve or try to get this thing through in as easy a way as possible without affecting the president. How is it possible that the AG is making this decision? And the language here is a giveaway that he's trying to hide something, because look at the way this is written. I just find it so interesting. So the special counsel's decision to describe the facts of his obstruction investigation without reaching any legal conclusions leaves it. Who leaves it to you? Leaves it to the Attorney General to determine whether the conduct described in the report constitutes a crime. It's just not feasible to me that there is any constitutional role for the AG when you have a special counsel. That's the point of having a special counsel. It's why we have a Congress. It's why we have an impeachment process. And
Sev, can I just point out something a few people on Periscope have mentioned?
Yeah.
Do you have that last page of the summary report with the signature? With the signature?
I will pull it up. I think I have a version of it. It might be hard to read in this, but give me a second and I'll see if I can.
I just wondered, is it signed by both Rosenstein and Barr, or just Barr?
Well, unfortunately, the version I have has this thing covering it, so I can't tell. But I have the actual letter here, so you can't see it, but I'll be able to tell you who it's signed by.
Okay, so I guess we're just
Barr.
We need to take Barr's word for it that Rod Rosenstein concluded that as well. Correct?
You're absolutely right. We don't know. We don't know any of these circumstances. I find the amount we've been maybe given less than 100 words here by Mueller himself in a 4-page letter. The quotes are tiny. They're so carefully chosen. They're parsed so carefully. We don't know if what Mueller knows. We don't know if Rosenstein knows. We don't know if Mueller knows that this was Barr's decision. He may have found out on TV when we all found out. There's a lot of questions to be asked around this, and it's really interesting to see what's the thoughts on people on Twitter. What are they on Periscope? What are they saying?
Barr is a political appointee and has no place to conclude anything.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to be a
shout out. I want to give a shout out, but I didn't catch your name quickly. Sorry, guys.
That's okay.
At 420 Lifeline said, how did Barr conclude his decision after only a weekend? How many pages was the report? We don't know how many pages the report is. It has not been reported how long the actual Mueller report is.
Another huge question, which I cannot believe has not been asked by the many, many reporters at the Justice Department today. That kind of fact should not be classified. How long does the Mueller report is not it should be an obvious thing for them to be answering as a background issue. They didn't even give that fact out today.
Well, you know why they won't?
Why?
Because then that would give away how much they've held back.
Yeah.
When and if they determine what they are going to release publicly. And say we know that it was 500 pages, that we will only be given 40.
Well,
we would know that, significant. I mean, just throwing numbers out there, it would be an indication that we know how much they're hiding from the American people.
I think that's going to be a huge matter for debates. And I know at the end of this
Oh,
document,
somebody said 546 pages.
oh, it is.
Whoever you are, I didn't know that. Where did you find that?
546 pages, and we've seen 4, but maybe only 10
yeah,
words.
I don't know if that's true. I'm just quickly seeing it on our Periscope.
Well, if that person can keep checking that out for us, that'll be really great. And by the way, we are looking at your comments on Periscope. Many more on your very popular feed, Tracy, than on mine, because I don't have any comments from anybody unless I've done something incorrectly. But hello, people. Hi.
Well, I am pretty lovable, so.
You're the most lovable person I know, and we both have had a bit of a day because we've been working on this for a long time, and to say we're invested in this project is an understatement. And we were hoping for something different from Mueller today, like many people were hoping for something different from Mueller. But there is a silver lining in all of this, and that is that there are many more investigations, but more importantly, it's quite possible that this is a pre-thought out move by Mueller to sort of, I described it today as maybe he's lighting the fuse for the bomb that's going to go off down the line. And that might be a big thing to think about. He doesn't want to be caught up in the middle of this by going in and saying, yeah, this guy did all this. Then it sort of proves the witch hunt theory. He wants to get away from the witch hunt theory, but he sort of set the stage for a lot of evidence to come out that could ultimately prove very damaging to the president. Yeah,
and I just want to point this out, Zev. We've known this for a long time, and we've talked about this on Narrative. Special Counsel Mueller was, I've been told, working with some other states, right. Maybe possibly even sharing information. So if that is true, as we've been told, then that would be part of the strategic chess game.
Right.
And that would also be part of what is being farmed out to other jurisdictions. So I want people to keep that in mind.
I think you're right. And it's good information you've been able to find out, because we've all assumed the SDNY or the DC office of the DOJ or Virginia or all these other places, we'll go through them in a bit, that have been involved in investigating the presidency. Some of them have been done in joint prosecutions, like with Stone, but some of them, we didn't know that they were connected. But what you're saying is that that there is a direct collaboration between Mueller and the SDNY. And that is really important, because the attention now is going to be very much on the Southern District of New York and on the DC trial, because so much is going on there. In fact, maybe we should take a look quickly at some of the other prosecutions or investigations taking place.
Yeah, and when you guys see these slides, it's overwhelming. When we were putting them together today, I mean, there are a lot of investigations. Let's just start with Southern District of New York. They're investigating the inauguration committee. They're investigating the Rebuilding America Now PAC, and I believe that has to do with Manafort and some donations from Qatar and other Middle Eastern countries. They're investigating the Michael Cohen Trump communications post-raid, and there's some questions there about pardons. I mean, that's just 3 investigations going on in the Southern District of New York.
Yeah, there's a lot to be determined from the SDNY, and they're probably the most aggressive of the districts that we know of. The Eastern District of Virginia. This is a tough slide to pronounce, but I will say there's that there's the Flynn case involving the Turks, and I will say that Elena Alexeyevna Khrushchenova, who's the woman from Concord, which is the management company for the IRA, so it actually does tie in very directly with what Mueller was looking into, is also still a pending case. That could be another case where collusion could be proven.
Right.
Certainly,
and Elena was the one who they suspected was the midterm elections. So the IRA wasn't done in 2016. She was involved with meddling in the midterm elections.
Exactly. And then looking at some of the District of Columbia investigations, this, of course, we mentioned Roger Stone. That case is still ongoing. The Michael Flynn case is still there. Rick Gates is still being prosecuted through there, although he's taken a 2-month extension. Konstantin Kilimnik, GRU officer, still there. That case is still pending. Maria Butina, possibly an agent for the Russian state, still being prosecuted through there. And then there's the IRA GRU case, which will never get to see court because the Russians aren't going to come here to attend the court hearings. But there's a lot to be investigated, which reminds me of one of the biggest the thing that makes me worry a little bit about the state of this investigation is the role of people like Oleg Deripaska, which we've had a mini obsession about here at Narrative, because clearly, how is it possible that Manafort and Gates and Kilimnik and polling data moving around, all of it going up to Oleg Deripaska, how come none of that qualified as collusion or conspiracy? I mean, Manafort's a Russian agent. He's working for a Russian oligarch.
That's what I was going to say. That's what we come down to. Is he considered the Russian government, an agent of the Russian government, just a Russian oligarch? I mean, I guess we need to think about that classification.
Well, he is. He has said himself that he does not separate himself from affairs of the state. Meaning he acts basically in the same way as he would for his business as in the interest of his state. He thinks of the two things as exactly the same thing. Secondly, many, 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 many people think he is a spy of some sort, either for the GRU or the FSB, and that he has been for over 20 years. And then there's this third question, which we hinted at in our Deripaska piece a few weeks ago, which is, is he also an informant for Steele? And is he also possibly an informant for the Department of Justice? And so what happens if a possible informant for the Department of Justice, is also the person who's the central person in coordinating Trump-Russia? You can't indict him, because that's the way informants work. They inform you in exchange for their not getting indicted. And maybe that is the reason this has all caught up in this little, no more indictments, no further indictments, but inconclusive kind of report, is that we cannot prove that Deripaska was working just on behalf of the states, because he was also working perhaps on behalf of the United States.
It's an interesting thought, and it's something we'll be I think you and I, if nobody else, will be pondering that for quite a while.
I had to go there because I think I'm the only person who would, but it is interesting, and it's really worth thinking about why the Mueller has found the things that he has. Because
one thing, Zev, that we left off of our list, and I had forgotten about it, but somebody on Periscope, because they're awesome and smart, reminded me, is we still have that mystery company, bank, whatever it is, case that was part of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation that we still don't know anything about.
Right, and we've all assumed, I have at least assumed, that it's Concord or one of those other companies, but it's not necessarily. And it could be any company. And we also don't have answers to the Saudi, UAE, Israeli thing, because it wasn't in Mueller's purview. But that's a serious part of the investigation.
I would bet that that's being handled by another jurisdiction. That hasn't gone away.
And Donald Trump Jr.'s meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya, who came there purporting to be working for the Russian government, and who apparently works for the Solicitor General in Moscow. How is it possible that meeting doesn't qualify for some sort of collusion or indictment? It sort of starts getting very messy, right, when you start looking at all. All right.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second.
No worries. I wasn't saying anything that exciting. Let's move on to, we've done all these. We've done all the investigations, I think.
No, we still have more.
There's more. There's the State Attorney General's investigations, the emoluments, and the Trump Inauguration Committee, again, which is foreign influence buying, right?
Correct. This is multiple attorney generals working together on these cases. We also have a couple more. You got another? Yep, New York State and New York City investigations, and they're investigating Trump's taxes, the Trump Organization, Deutsche Bank, and the Trump Foundation. These aren't going away either, guys.
Yes, and keep your eye out, especially on the Deutsche Bank ones. There is a lot a lot of dirt floating around in their files, and some of it's going to hopefully
and
show
not
up.
just on Trump, but on some members of his cabinet as well.
Yeah, I mean, Wilbur Ross, amongst the people that is being investigated separately as well for his work with Bank of Cyprus. There is just so much, and we probably are not going to be able to get much further than where we are right now, except to tell you that there is a lot of hope. And I think when we wake up tomorrow, you will find a new vigor and a new determination by the Democrats to do what they need to do, and that might mean beginning impeachment proceedings, because not right now. Obviously, they'll have to get the evidence and do all those other things, the formalities. But at the end of the day, it's going to be Congress and the will of the people, which is expressed through Congress, which determines whether these wrongdoings that we know happened that didn't rise to the level of indictment, whether they rise to the level of impeachment. And the only way to find out is to go through the motions. Even if you don't think it's gonna work, you really can't not go through the motions. And I think that's a bit of a challenge to Pelosi, but it's one of the things they might have to think about in the next few weeks.
Yeah, and I'm not holding out for that impeachment process, Zev. I put it on my Twitter earlier today, and I really want everybody to think about it. From my perspective, I want everybody to start working on getting out the vote and getting it out today and every day until the 2020 election. Because in my heart, I believe, and this has been a tough day for me. When we first got the report, I talked to Zev and I said, I'm not sure I can go on the air tonight because I'm extremely emotional and I need time to absorb what is being said. And we've been digging on this for 2 years, and you mean to tell me this is it? And, I had a really hard time until I stepped back and I looked at it, and we talked about the process, and we talked about what it really meant and what's going to happen going forward. And we have a lot of hope. But please get out the vote for 2020, because it's our vote that's going to make a difference in the next election. Get your neighbors voting, your neighbors' friends voting, your neighbors' friends' voting, and talk to people about policy issues and where we are now and where we want to be 4 years from now.
And just to pick up two, well said, by the way, but also just to pick up on two important thoughts of what you said, start now, because by the time we get to November 2020, it's a long way away, it seems like, but it's not. You've got to start organizing today to make sure that the right people show up and the right number of people show up. And then also the other important thing that you mentioned was policy. We're not going to, I shouldn't say we, because I don't pick a party, but Democrats are not going to win without the right candidate who's talking about the right policies. Because if it's just an anti-Trump message, it's not going to cut through their monstrous machine and their data machine. It needs to speak to the hearts of Americans. It needs to really mobilize people because it's going to affect them in their everyday lives. It's got to speak to healthcare. It's got to speak to climate change. It's got to speak to the things that people are concerned about at the core. And that's more than just Trump. Trump will be part of it, but certainly policies and how we're going to solve these very, very challenging threats that are facing America and the world. That is what's going to drive people, I think, at the end of the day, especially younger demographics to the polling booths. So organize and focus on policies.
And in fact, Zev and I have talked in depth about our coverage of what we want going forward, election coverage going into 2020. And we are planning on bringing you all of the policy statements. Every time something comes up about climate change, we'll be on it. Every time, we want you to be as informed as possible when it comes time to vote. And we will be doing it here at Narrative Live.
Because as much as we would love to spend another 2 years just talking about Donald Trump and Russia, I don't know if we could handle it. And we've negotiated, we've looked at this and investigated so much of this that we really have reached fairly strong conclusions about where we are. There's still more to be revealed, but it's time to look forward as well. It's time to look ahead to how we're going to get out of this mess, because it is a mess. And the way to do it is looking at the polling booths and the incredibly strong group of candidates, none of which are front runners yet. Some of them are beginning to seem more like front runners than others, but the field is wide open, and you get to decide. At the end of the day, it's we still get a vote in who our candidates are and who our nominees are. And it's up to you who they become. So don't feel so down, Tracy. Everything's okay.
Yeah, I'm feeling much better now. Thank you. And being here with all of you helps. It's like, you know, it gets me through. You guys are awesome and I love you. And I wouldn't be here where I am today with Zev if it weren't for all of the supporters on Twitter. So thank you very much.
You really are an inspiration to everyone, Tracy. And oops, I hope I didn't stop the feed there accidentally, but I think we didn't. So you really are a huge inspiration to me and to everybody else who follows us both, because I know that people see a lot of themselves in you, but they also see a lot of courage and American spirit and a strong woman who's gonna help shape the future of America. So it's always an exciting thing to be part of a show with you and part of what we're doing at Narrative. I don't know if there's any other comments on Periscope. We've got
nope, just a lot of thank yous. I feel like a sense of a lot of people are thankful that we at least popped on tonight to address some of their concerns.
Well, we love everybody, and thank you very much for taking time to spend it with us tonight. Narrative Live will be back sometime this week. We have some really interesting stuff coming up on the Seder hearings, which we're going to talk about in great detail. We've got some exclusive information around that, plus a lot more coming up this week. So we'll see you on the Twitter, as they say. Or they don't say. Bye, Tracy.
Bye, guys.